What's going on, you guys? Welcome to the Unlock Your Freedom podcast with Kevin Kepple. If you're looking to create more in your life, and if you want more of anything, it's not about doing more, it's about being more. So I'm excited you're here, and I'll see you guys on the inside. Well, I know a huge part of your work is helping leaders bring the best of them into the work they're doing and the people they lead. And so I'd love for you to just kick us off with the why behind what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I did 22 years in the military. I did about 20 of those in the SEAL teams. And when I retired, I started a consulting business. I started my own consulting business, actually, with at the behest of a woman in Dallas, Kim Arnold. Her and I still keep in contact, but it was through an organization called the Honor Foundation. And I went to Dallas and we engaged together. And eventually she brought me back after this trip through the Honor Foundation. That's a whole story in itself. But I worked with the organization that she was with at the time to create some leadership development curriculum for upper middle management and emerging leaders within that space. And I was flying back to San Diego and I said, gosh, I could really do this. And the lessons that I was imparting weren't anything complex from my perspective. They were things that I learned very early in my career within the SEAL teams, because the military, from my perspective, particularly the SEALs and special operations, does a really, really good job developing its leaders in a very, very deliberate fashion. And a phrase that I like to use a lot is it's baked into the cake. And I saw kind of a deficiency within the private sector. And I've really, really had a chance to think about this, this calendar year for various reasons. But I mean, my mission from an organizational perspective of what Fatal Flaw, which is my consulting company, is to build a society of leaders and mentors that can effectively navigate the chaos of the modern world. And that's my juice from that perspective, is to really, really create a great culture within the workplace, and ideally, starting small but thinking big from a national perspective, because leadership is what shapes culture at organizations. And I really, really believe that if you get out there and mentor people within the leadership space, you can create a good culture through leadership practices and allow people to execute on a decentralized leadership framework and really increase the pace of business, as well as cultivate and mentor the people in your charge at your organization.
So you use the word mentor a couple of times in there. I think I'd love to really get your understanding of what a good mentor is, and maybe contrast gives us clarity in what a good mentor isn't.
I mean, there's a plethora of examples out there for what a good mentor is not. Let's focus on the right example, if you will, which is, because once you know what right looks like, everything else is kind of wrong, if you will. I would say that you can boil it down to some really simple things, which is a leader that, one, leads by example, communicates effectively, and then also from within that mentorship space, trains the people in their charge or care. There's a lot of sensitivity behind wordings there, right? That to train them for the end state of them taking over your role, which is very counterintuitive, I've come to find out, or not counterintuitive, but there's a lot of resistance around that within the private sector space, which is interesting because on average, people shift careers or want to shift careers around 2 to 3 years of being in that role. And within the military, particularly special operations, and of course, my background being in the SEAL teams, you are training the people that exist from a hierarchical perspective on the level below, right? And that's not saying that's a derogatory thing. It's just they're more junior people. You are training them all the time to progress into that role above. So the next time they get ready for deployment, if you will, they are assuming the higher level of responsibility and they're appropriately mentored within that space. And so I would say generally from a really simplistic perspective, that's what it looks like is I look to the person to my right or left, what have you, and they work for me. And it's, I am going to build your skills and or blind spots deficiencies to a point where if I am not here for whatever reason, you can successfully execute the necessary tasks to achieve whatever outcome because I've been mentoring you and I've been building you up for that space. And oftentimes in the SEAL teams, towards the end of certain training blocks, the team leader will be put down. They will be within a training perspective. It will be, okay, the team leader is going to go down, and then the assistant team leader will assume that role in the middle of the training exercise. And that's one way to see, okay, hey, where are things at in a stress environment, but also it's just incorporating those junior personnel into the day-to-day decisions. It's increasing the responsibility, giving them guidance, say, hey, this is the end state that we're shooting for. Here's the parameters that I would like to see you work within. And then here's the date that I want you to complete this task. Go do great things. It builds trust and it also builds skills within that space. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I think that was a phenomenal example. And it takes courage as a leader, I feel like, to pour into the people behind you and make yourself a replacement, more or less. But that's like the deal. That's the point of leadership to me, is to grow as much as we can, to give it all away, because the more I have, the more I can share with the people I'm leading. And I want to talk about trust, because you just used that word. And like, without trust, I don't feel like anything productive happens, because it's like psychological safety, right? And if I don't feel safe, I don't feel like I have freedom. I'm just reacting to what I know, even if it doesn't get me what I want. And so what types of things, especially like high stress environment like combat, or even training for combat, is super stressful, even thinking about it. So I can't imagine being in it. And so what types of things as a leader, do you see that really is productive at building trust and helping people, co-create the leader's vision?
From my perspective, it really defaults to these three leadership principles. From my perspective, I think that there's a ton more principles out there. There's no shortage of great publications from leadership, from peers of mine, as well as other people within the special operations community, detailing out what a good leader looks like. Leading by example, communicating effectively, and then following through with that from a leading by example, and then mentoring your people. Like, if you can stick to those three things, and there's a plethora of scenarios that could be detailed out within that space, but just the very foundational element, think about just a bad leader, right? Where they go out and they say one thing and do something else. And we're all flawed humans, right? And we all make mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. But outside of just giving general grace, you have that moment on this stage where the leader gets up and they say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then getting off, that's the real test of leadership, is when you walk off that stage, and the grind that you engage in on a day-to-day basis. That's the first place, from my perspective, that is, hey, that's going to help build trust. And there's not a lot of life hacks, if you will, to build trust. Trust takes time, just like mentorship. It's the long game. And that's where a lot of people fail. And Simon Sinek talks about this. He has a great little video out there, and he spent a lot of time in the SEAL teams, and a lot of his observing the SEAL teams and other special operations units as well. But a lot of his advice about teams and culture and all of that stuff was learned through the SEALs and special operations. And he talks about, he has a brief video on YouTube where he says, you've got these people that go to these leadership keynotes, they go to these workshops, and then they come back to the organization, and what happens? Nothing changes. And it's the grind. It's people know the right thing, and then laziness. There's a saying in the teams, people are like, laziness wins. Like, let's do it as easy and as effective as possible within context, right? It's not just like, be dirtbags and not do the task at hand. It's just, how can we do this as effectively as possible and as easily as possible? But within the realm of leadership, that saying, if you will, it doesn't necessarily apply, because it is a grind to do the right thing and to sit there and be like, okay, I need to showcase for my team what is acceptable. And that's hard to do on a day in and day out basis. I mean, people are watching you. And being a leader is a lot like being a parent, if you will, and not from a derogatory statement, like the people that work for you are children. It's from the lens of, they're going to look at your behavior and you're going to demonstrate what is acceptable through your actions. And whether you've been in a leadership position or not, just by the fact that you are on this earth, you've had a parental figure, and they've probably done some things well, and they've probably done some things not so great. And there's a sliding scale there, right? With the ultimate, like, my parent was not a good parent, to my parent was the best parent that could have. And then somewhere on that line is where your parenting examples fall, right? And you can look to that and go, okay, yeah, my mom and dad said this, and then they did this, and it lined up, or maybe didn't line up with their actions, right? It's the same thing with leadership. It's just like, hey, lead by example, communicate effectively, and then build your people up along the way.
Yeah. Well, really simple, right? But maybe not easy, like you said. So you also talked about,
it's simple in concept, but it's hard to execute on.
Yeah. Well, and
or it can.
It's that thought, right? It's more is caught than taught, right? Because people are always watching you as a leader, and you're the model, and they're like, oh,
true.
The boss is, cutting corners, so we should cut corners, or whatever the case may be. So when it comes to communication and communicating effectively, what are some of the most powerful communicators have in common?
They strive to understand, or make sure that they're clearly understood, that it's not thrown down as some sort of totalitarian edict, if you will, or edict. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it's, hey, here's my message. Was my message received appropriately? In the way that it was intended. So here's what I want. Regurgitate. Let's make sure let's make sure that there's alignment there. If there's disalignment, okay, let's try communicating it in a different fashion so we get to alignment, and then just kind of repeating that process until things come together, right? I would say that the best communicators are the ones that are doing that.
So with regards to building organizations, man, I know that's something you do, and thanks for sticking with me. We just had a little power surge here, and Greg was kind enough to wait around for 5 to 10 minutes. But building organizations, helping with change management, things like that. So I'd love to just know what that looks like when you go in somewhere and really help them clean it up and be better versions of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the phrase is culture kills, right? And that the golden handcuffs and or high paying salaries only keep people around for so long. And the good people they'll speak with their feet, if you will, at once organizations really, really start crushing you from a culture perspective. So going into small, medium-sized businesses and or startups in a space where they're at the late seed to Series A space, and knowing that, hey, what got us to here is not going to get us to there. An organization that has enough awareness that things need to change is the place where I bring my greatest value. I do a number of different offerings, but the one that I enjoy the most is going in fractionally, as kind of a part-time person, if you will, kind of part of the organization, but not really. And then building out a great culture through leadership practices and allowing them to scale in a decentralized or utilize a decentralized leadership structure, which is pushing decisions down to the lowest possible level. And I have a whole process behind that.
Could you tell us the first step in the process of decentralized leadership?
Yeah, figuring out who you are as an organization. Like, what is your cultural tenets? Like, what binds us together? Who are we? What do we represent? Because then it's And then you build off of that foundationally.
And so would that include values and like mission statement and things of that nature?
Yep. Not necessarily a mission statement. I'm not saying that mission statements are bad, but your mission, vision, values, yeah, for sure. I prefer to inject what I refer to as a North Star, which is a statement that sums up what you want to do as an organization and communicates the values that or the cultural tenets that are already ingrained or you want to ingrain in the organization and or demonstrate. But what I've found is that your traditional mission and vision statements often are not integrated into the daily life of the organization. I'm not saying that there's not value behind them. There is. You put them on the website, put them in investor decks or what have you. It's, hey, this is what we're going to. But what is that statement that can be written on a bar napkin, ideally after a couple drinks, too, that is easily integrated into people's lives where people can remember? It's like, oh, we're going to do this. This is who we are. And this drives our decision-making process. I was part of a pharmaceutical startup, and which was eventually partially acquired by Pfizer. And I was brought in as a consultant originally and then came on full time. And we took that organization from 62 people to 1,200 people in roughly 8 months, and then went public and then got acquired by Pfizer last October for $13 billion roughly, or 12, maybe 12 billion. I mean, I was grateful to be part of that process. It was not me solely, Greg Hake, that was building that organization. It was a team effort. And for me, it was a really easy segue from the SEAL teams to Biohaven, which is still in existence today. So Biohaven Pharmaceuticals, shout out to all those great people there. And the culture in that organization drove the unique environment that allowed them to come in and not only succeed, but exceed the expectations for what a small pharma company could do. And they're still doing that today. It was very much a David and Goliath mentality, and that organization was just able to move fast. And the concept of the North Star is something that I pulled from my time at that organization. There was a phrase at Biohaven, which was be bold, be brave, be brilliant, be Biohaven. And people used that phrase easily on a weekly basis in meetings, if not on a daily basis throughout the organization. People would justify decisions and say, hey, I made this decision because it's in keeping with our essentially ethos, which is our North Star. And it allowed that organization, which was much smaller than the larger pharmas, obviously, to outmaneuver them through speed of decision and action.
And so I'm sure you've probably said it and heard it many times, but culture eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week or something like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So what do you think some of the common denominators between like really powerful cultures that you've been a part of or read about or seen have?
Oh gosh. They invest in their people, and they really, really do want to empower them to make decisions. They're not afraid of risk either. Not afraid of risk. Something Biohaven got their molecular approval for their compound literally the month that the COVID lockdowns hit. We had a gosh, how do I want it? Like an all hands meeting, if you will, in Vegas. And then that Friday, like the last day of the conference, the lockdowns happened. And it was, holy shit, now what do we do? And within a week or two, that organization pivoted to a virtual environment, which hindsight being 2020, everyone's like, oh yeah, let's do this. Well, it took our competitors in some cases up to 8 months to pivot to that space. But Biohaven was, okay, we need to get out there. Business still needs to be conducted. this isn't the end of the world. How do we do this? And it was, we will do all of our business virtually, and just boom, which now it's an orthodox concept. It's like, oh, of course we'll do it virtually. Well, at the time, that was not something that was very common. Within my own work and within special operations have been using decentralized leadership through this sort of medium for decades. So my first deployment within support of the global war on terror back in 2003, we had video conferences. But in order to be successful within that space, you need something that ties the organization together, which is a common goal, which easily for special operations, it's, hey, we're taking the fight to the enemy. And then also culture and trust. And people understood at Biohaven that you're the cream of the crop. There was a very, very deliberate hiring / selection process. I would refer to as a selection process, largely due to my upbringing, if you will. My adult life was in special operations, and the selection process, in order to get into special operations, regardless of the unit, is very, very stringent. And so there was a knowledge that the other person on the end of this screen knew what they were doing, was competent, and also was aligned from a guiding principles perspective. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, though.
No, I think that's a really powerful concept, because when everybody has the same values or the same requirements to be a part of the team, you don't have to, first off, explain where you're coming from nearly as much, because everybody's already aligned to the same values, same principles, same rigorous test, maybe with the SEALs teams, because you don't get in there by just showing up and signing a piece of paper, right? You got to do certain things to even get on the dance floor. And that's really cool, just knowing what people are bringing to the table without having to talk to them first. And I think that saves a tremendous amount of horsepower too, because I've been a part of corporations, and when we had a certain way we did things, like one of the companies I work for is a multi-billion-dollar company. It was God first, family second, career third. And that was like who you be if you were a leader at that company. And it was really great, because you don't have to explain the importance of taking care of your family or, your faith or whatever the case may be. And, it weeded out the people who just didn't align with that. Not that they were bad people, but that's not how they saw the world. And, we wanted, people that were looking through that lens of, I guess unconditional love and service really is what it boiled down to in so many cases. And it was really nice to have. And it didn't mean it was like perfect by any means. It wasn't the unicorn ranch. Everything wasn't a fairy tale, but it was definitely better than a stick in the eye. But, man, I know.
Absolutely.
So I know you got a lot going on. So let's transition here to the end. I got a couple questions for you, and we'll send you on your way. So
for sure.
What's a favorite book to read, recommend, or give away?
I'm a huge fan of Stephen Pressfield. We briefly chatted about this before the recording. Lately, I've been recommending, outside of the Stephen Pressfield, Turning Pro is one of my favorite books of his, really quick read. And then, of course, Gates of Fire from him. That's a phenomenal read as well. And then lately, I've been gifting out two books in particular, which is Influence, and I forget the author for that.
Is that Robert Cialdini?
And then I think so. That's a great book. And it's just rooted in like science and studies of this is what people do. Yeah. And then another book is 1984.
Ooh, yeah.
So yeah, I've been giving people that. I was like, there's some, and not to get into a political discussion, but we definitely live in some tumultuous, interesting times, to put it mildly. So the those books I've been recommending a lot, but from a professional perspective, Turning Pro is great, as well as Influence. And then just from a informational, like great story, Gates of Fire. That's just awesome. It's just an awesome book.
All of those are great books. And 1984, read it again a few years ago, and I was like, you make these ideas or judgments in your head. It's like, that's ludicrous, right? Like, I'm so glad we don't live in that world. That sounds like China or something. And it'd be a scary revisit. So speaking of that, what does freedom mean to you here on the Unlock Your Freedom podcast?
Oh gosh. I'm a very, very freedom driven person. I mean, to do what I want to do within reason, of course, with those that I care about when I want to. I mean, that's from an individual freedoms perspective, as long as I'm not, of course, infringing on other people's
Yeah.
freedoms and or doing harm. Uh, I mean, I've traveled around the world often to, as I say to people, I was like, I got sent to the bad neighborhood often, and so I have a real genuine appreciation for what our country offers, and quite frankly, it's painful for me to see where we're at as a nation, and I'm kind of tired of being quiet about it. And I think people need to raise awareness because, like that book, 1984, I feel like we're living in that space, at least in the very, very, in a lot of ways. And it's concerning to me, especially after spending much of my adult life protecting what we have here. And I feel like we have become complacent as a society. And I'm not advocating for one political approach or another. What I would love to see is a return to the ability to engage in polite discourse at a national level. And I think we've lost that.
Yeah.
I think that we're so polarized as a people that we can't do that. And so for me, like, it's the concept of freedom and the discussion behind it is so complex. It's just like, hey, let me live my life. I'm not an isolationist by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do and who I am is not nefarious. And I just want to be able to live the way I want to live, and that going down those details is just like another discussion, of course. But I don't think it's extreme in any form or fashion, personally. So
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is so important to be able to have the ability to not agree with other people and still be okay, right? Like, I don't need you to tell me I'm
absolutely,
100% right for me to be okay, because I'm never going to be 100% right. And it's, I think it's a superpower if you can return love for hate. And there's so many people that are just married to being right as opposed to actually getting what they want. It's like, everybody wants freedom, I think. And, it's like, I'd rather be right and, than actually get that freedom sometimes, which is kind of ludicrous if you think about it. But,
yeah,
um,
for sure. I mean, conflict is two people in a room, as they say, because there's not going to be 100% alignment within that space. And so, I mean, I'm not here to tell people what to do, but and also on that note, don't come into my life and say that this is how you should live. Like, it's my choice. I have the execution authority behind my own decisions, right? So allow me that courtesy, and I will allow you to do the same.
and that's autonomy, right? And autonomy is one of the prerequisites of motivation. Like, if I don't feel like I have a choice or freedom to do what I want, then I'm not motivated, because what's the point, right? Like, I'm just following. And, like, I think everybody has capacity to lead on some level. It's more of a behavior than a position, really. So
Absolutely.
where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I do a couple posts a week just to put stuff out there. Admittedly, being on social media does not come naturally to me. It's not something, quite frankly, that I enjoy. I mean, I like writing and putting things out there, and it's very uncomfortable for me. I have a website, fatalflawnation.com. That is, from a professional services perspective, talks about my offerings, and it's very similar to, well, it's not active like LinkedIn. You just go there and it's passive. Whereas on LinkedIn, you can follow my posts and my profile and see if you like what I'm putting out, and provide feedback, if you will.
Yeah.
So
Oh, cool. Well said.
those are the two primary ways. And I've got a bunch of videos out on YouTube as well, from podcasts, and some immediately following the teams where I did some shooting stuff that was more for fun, and then some that are from a podcast perspective like this. So
Yeah, very cool. All right, let's do one more question. What's something I could have asked that I didn't, that you'd like to
sure.
share about before we get out of here?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm not sure right
Yeah.
offhand. Uh,
I can
yeah,
ask differently if it'd be helpful.
sure. I mean, go right
Yeah.
ahead. Go right ahead. Let's try it
If you
again.
could get everybody in the world to hear one message, what would that be?
Ooh. Um, Gosh, I had it. Just, I would say that. I mean, my one message is, yeah, just get out there and try and make a positive impact from a leadership perspective every day. And like that's kind of like my personal goal is to go out there and to change the world one relationship at a
Yeah.
time is my like personal mission statement. And then my organizational statement is to build a society of leaders and mentors that can effectively navigate the chaos of the modern world. That's like my organizational one. But my personal one is to change the world one relationship at a time, whether that's through positive means or the establishment of a boundary. You know, I mean, it can take many forms, but I mean, I really do try and do that every day. And I would say that if there's one message that I would love to see catch fire is that one. You know, it seems just like people have within the sphere of the world that I live, which is Southern California. Um, it does not seem that we're invested in our fellow man, even if it's just waving. Like I'm originally from Nebraska, and I mean, when you drive down a country road, you wave at the people that pass you and you say hi, and it's just it's very authentic to that culture. And here, when I say good morning to people, I'd say about 50% of the time people look away, and it's like, why?
Yeah.
You know, why can't we just be courteous to one another? So
Yeah. I love that, man, because, I think connections, what we're all looking for as humans, to see and to be seen by other humans, because that tells us we're safe. And I think that's pretty good advice. Thanks for sharing that. All right, you guys, thanks for being
no,
here.
thank you.
Greg, thanks, man. I appreciate you sticking with me. We had a bumpy ride, but we
No, thank
we
you.
made it to the end. So, you guys check out Greg. He's a great guy, man. He's got a big brain and a big heart, and if you're a leader looking for more, that's a good place to go look for it. So, thanks again, man. We'll see you
Thank you.
guys next time on Pleasure. We'll see y'all next time. Bye, everybody. Alrighty, you guys. Thanks for making it through to the end of the Unlock Your Freedom podcast with us. Really grateful to have amazing listeners like you. Thank you guys again for listening. We love you, and we'll see you next time inside the Unlock Your Freedom podcast with Kevin Kepple.